They had expected beatings, starvation, and execution. German soldiers, captured by American forces during World War II, had been thoroughly indoctrinated by Wehrmacht propaganda that painted Americans as gangsters from Chicago who would show no mercy to prisoners. Years of Nazi propaganda had portrayed the United States as a mongrel nation of criminals and jazz degenerates who would torture and kill any German who fell into their hands. When trains and trucks carried thousands of captured Germans from ports on the East Coast toward camps scattered across the American heartland, most believed they were being transported to their deaths. The moment they arrived at camps in states like Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas, however, reality shattered every expectation. Instead of execution squads, they found American military police processing them with bureaucratic efficiency. Names were recorded on typed forms, identification photographs taken with proper lighting, and medical examinations conducted by doctors who documented injuries for treatment rather than exploitation. The prisoners were assigned numbers, given receipts for confiscated personal items, and marched toward compounds that looked more like small American towns than death camps. The camps themselves defied comprehension. Behind barbed wire fences stood rows of wooden barracks built to American military specifications, with windows that opened, doors that locked from inside, and electric lights that functioned. Each building was divided into rooms for smaller groups rather than vast warehouses. There were concrete paths between buildings, drainage systems that prevented flooding, and designated areas for different activities. Men who had slept in mud now found themselves assigned to actual beds with mattresses and blankets. The food situation proved even more shocking than the accommodations. Within hours of arrival, prisoners received hot meals that exceeded what German forces had been eating for months. There was actual meat, recognizably fresh vegetables, white bread instead of the grey substance stretched with sawdust, and real coffee. Many prisoners initially suspected poison, but hunger overcame suspicion, and they discovered the Americans fed them the same rations their own troops received. Medical care stunned men who had watched comrades die from infected wounds. American medical officers examined each prisoner thoroughly, documenting everything from dental problems to chronic diseases. Antibiotics, which had become mythical in the German military, were administered routinely. Surgery was performed with actual anesthesia. Men who had hidden wounds for weeks found themselves in hospital wards where nurses changed bandages daily. The presence of other German prisoners created immediate social dynamics that camp authorities had carefully planned. Officers were separated from enlisted men but not given significantly better treatment. Kriegsmarine sailors mixed with Luftwaffe pilots and Wehrmacht infantry. Ages ranged from teenagers hastily conscripted to career soldiers. This deliberate mixing prevented the reformation of cohesive military units that might organize resistance. Within days, a routine emerged that bore no resemblance to expected chaos. Reveille at 0600, organized washing periods with running water and soap. Breakfast at 0700, work details for volunteers paid in camp currency. Lunch at noon, dinner at 1,700. Lights out at 2,200. The mechanical precision stood in sharp contrast to the Wehrmacht's collapse. The hygiene requirements imposed by American authorities represented the first major cultural shock beyond basic survival. Every prisoner was required to shower at least twice weekly, maintain short, neat hair, shave regularly with provided razors, keep fingernails trimmed and clean, and brush teeth with supplied powder. For men who had gone months without proper bathing and become accustomed to lice as constant companions, these requirements seemed to belong to a peacetime world that no longer existed. The establishment of camp barber shops within weeks of opening seemed like impossible luxury. Designated buildings were equipped with actual barber chairs, mirrors, electric clippers, scissors, and all the implements of civilized grooming. The sight of these facilities, operated with the same professionalism as any small-town American barber shop, created cognitive dissonance for prisoners trying to reconcile captivity with such ordinary comfort. The barbers themselves were often German prisoners who had practiced the trade before the war. A man who had cut hair in Munich found himself wielding professional scissors again, though now under guard in a Texas prison camp. These prisoner barbers were paid in camp scrip, given slightly better quarters, and developed reputations that made some more sought after than others. The normal dynamics of customer preference emerged even behind barbed wire. Sitting in an actual barber chair while another human being carefully cut your hair with proper tools was transformative for men reduced to pure survival. The mirrors confronted them with their own appearances for the first time in months. Some wept at seeing themselves, mourning lost youth. Others discovered that beneath the dirt and defeat, they still resembled the people they had been before the war. The barber shops operated on strict schedules. Appointments were logged, waiting lists maintained, and services distributed with surprising equality. A former colonel might wait behind a private, American guards showing complete indifference to Wehrmacht rank. This democratization happened without comment, simply the way Americans did things. Hair-cutting styles were regulated but not severely. Military short was required, but individual preferences were allowed within that parameter. The ability to choose, however limited, exercised mental muscles that military service and captivity had atrophied. Making a decision about hair length was a small act of individual will, in a situation where agency had been systematically removed. The barber shops served social functions beyond grooming. While waiting their turn, prisoners exchanged information about the war's progress and news from different compounds. The barber chairs became confessionals where men spoke more freely than in barracks. Normal barbershop conversation about sports and weather took on different meaning when conducted between former enemies on enemy soil. Electric clippers fascinated prisoners who had watched Germany's infrastructure collapse. These camps had reliable electricity for barber tools while German cities went dark. The steady hum became associated with American abundance, a reminder of the industrial might that had defeated them. Shaving equipment presented another layer of controlled dignity. Prisoners were issued safety razors, along with regularly replaced blades. Shaving cream was provided, and mirrors were available in washing facilities. The act of shaving became a ritual that separated civilized routine from battlefield barbarism. The establishment of comprehensive tailoring services seemed impossibly generous to men whose uniforms had rotted during the war's final campaigns. American quartermasters had calculated that maintaining prisoner clothing was more economical than replacement, and prisoners skilled in tailoring could provide valuable labor. Buildings were equipped with sewing machines, cutting tables, thread, needles, and fabric that exceeded anything available in Germany during the final war years. The tailoring shops were organized with American industrial efficiency. Machines were arranged in rows with proper lighting. Thread was stored in organized cabinets, patterns posted on walls. Damaged clothing was collected on schedules, sorted, and distributed to workers with appropriate skills. Prisoner tailors were selected based on skill rather than rank. A master tailor from Hamburg might supervise a shop where former officers worked under his direction. This pragmatic approach to labor allocation created new social dynamics where competence mattered more than previous status. The first task was repairing uniforms prisoners had worn when captured. Garments that were more holes than fabric were methodically mended. The transformation of rags into wearable clothing provided tangible proof that Americans intended to maintain prisoners properly. New clothing production began once repairs were managed. Work uniforms, shirts, underwear, and even pajamas were cut from fabric that seemed impossibly abundant. Patterns were adjusted for different body types, acknowledging individual differences in ways military uniformity usually ignored. The shops produced blankets, sheets, towels, and curtains for barracks windows. Each item was inspected for quality and distributed according to schedules, ensuring equitable access. These items accumulated into an environment that felt more like austere housing than imprisonment. Winter clothing production became critical as seasons changed. Germans who had arrived in summer uniforms needed warm garments for northern winters. The systematic preparation for seasonal changes demonstrated long-term planning that suggested prisoners would neither be executed nor quickly released. Laundry services emerged as perhaps the most systematically impressive aspect of camp maintenance. Industrial washing machines, powered by seemingly unlimited electricity and hot water from massive boilers, operated on schedules processing thousands of garments weekly. For men who had worn the same uniform for months, the sight of these machines seemed to belong to a fantasy of American abundance. The laundry facilities occupied dedicated buildings with concrete floors engineered for drainage and ventilation systems managing steam. Rows of washing machines, each larger than anything most Germans had seen, operated with mechanical precision. The industrial scale demonstrated American logistical capabilities that dwarfed anything Germany had achieved. Prisoners assigned to laundry duty learned to operate these machines according to strict protocols. Clothing was sorted by type, water temperatures specified, detergent measured precisely, and washing times standardized. The scientific approach reflected American faith in systematic methods. Each prisoner's clothing was marked with their identification number, ensuring items returned to the correct owner. This individual tracking seemed impossibly complex to men accustomed to communal military life, yet the system processed hundreds of bundles weekly with remarkable accuracy. Soap powder was dispensed in quantities that seemed wasteful to men from a nation where soap had been rationed for years. Fresh boxes were opened each shift, white powder scooped generously into machines. The sharp smell of industrial detergent replaced the sour odor that had defined military life. Mechanical wringers pressed water from clothes efficiently. Drying facilities ranged from mechanical dryers to vast outdoor lines. Industrial presses with steam functions smoothed wrinkles from dozens of garments hourly. The resulting clothes, crisp and neat, bore no resemblance to the wrinkled uniforms of defeated soldiers. Bedding received the same thorough treatment. Sheets and blankets were collected weekly, washed, and returned smelling of soap. For men who had slept in mud or on straw, clean sheets renewed weekly seemed almost obscene, yet it happened with clockwork regularity. Beyond these basic services, American camps provided amenities that seemed impossible for prisoner facilities. Canteens operated where prisoners could spend earned scrip on cigarettes, candy, and comfort items. Libraries stocked German books, including works banned in Nazi Germany. Sports equipment was provided for soccer and volleyball leagues. Theatrical productions were permitted, with costumes made in tailoring shops. Educational opportunities stunned men from an army where thinking was discouraged. Prisoners with academic backgrounds organized classes in languages, mathematics, and sciences. American authorities provided supplies like paper and blackboards. Some camps developed extensive programs preparing prisoners for post-war careers. Music programs flourished beyond anything imaginable. Instruments were provided through the Red Cross, and prisoner orchestras formed. A Texas camp had a 40-piece orchestra performing classical concerts. Sheet music was obtained, rehearsal spaces designated, and performances scheduled. German prisoners played Beethoven for American guards who applauded politely. Medical services extended far beyond emergency care. Dental work included fillings and repairs, not just extractions. Eyeglasses were prescribed and provided. Mental health was addressed with efforts to identify and treat combat trauma. Surgical procedures were performed for non-emergency conditions. The comprehensive care exceeded what many had received as active soldiers. Religious services were protected and facilitated. Catholic and Protestant chaplains ministered, and Jewish prisoners practiced their faith freely despite the horrific irony given Germany's actions. Chapels were designated, religious materials provided, and holy days observed. Work programs extended to American agricultural and industrial needs. Prisoners picked cotton in Texas, cut timber in Maine, and canned food in California. They were paid according to Geneva Convention requirements, earning money saved for eventual release. Working alongside American civilians exposed prisoners to American life in ways that profoundly influenced their perspectives. Interaction with civilians during work details shattered propaganda myths. Farmers often ate lunch with prisoners, sharing food and conversation despite language barriers. Rural Americans showed curiosity rather than hatred, offering cigarettes and showing family photographs. The absence of expected vengeance confused prisoners told Americans would torture them. The mail system allowing correspondence with Germany amazed prisoners who assumed they'd been written off as dead. Letters could be sent and received through the Red Cross. The ability to inform families they were alive and receive news from home provided psychological anchoring, preventing complete despair. Recreation facilities developed into elaborate systems. Movie theaters showed American films with German subtitles. Athletic fields hosted tournaments. Libraries grew to thousands of volumes. Art studios were established for murals. Photography clubs documented camp life. These activities provided mental stimulation, preventing deterioration common in purely punitive imprisonment. Camp newspapers produced by prisoners became sophisticated publications. Using provided printing equipment, prisoner journalists created papers featuring news, sports coverage, and cultural reviews. These publications documented the strange normalcy developing behind barbed wire. Social hierarchies reformed along different lines than military rank. Barbers, tailors, and talented cooks gained prestige regardless of former status. English speakers became valuable intermediaries. A new economy of respect emerged based on usefulness rather than Wehrmacht insignia. Anti-Nazi prisoners created internal tensions carefully managed by authorities. German communists, socialists, and Democrats conscripted against their will were mixed with convinced Nazis. The resulting debates revealed ideological diversity that Nazi uniformity had suppressed. Secret re-education programs operated alongside visible services. Authorities identified prisoners with democratic leanings and provided additional materials. These men were prepared to assist reconstruction. The re-education was subtle, accomplished through exposure to American life rather than heavy-handed propaganda. The contrast with Soviet prisoner camps became increasingly stark. While Americans provided barbershops and clean laundry, Soviets worked German prisoners to death in Siberian mines. This comparison wasn't lost on prisoners who realized capture by Americans had likely saved their lives. As Germany's defeat became inevitable, camps adapted to prepare prisoners for repatriation. English classes intensified. Vocational training expanded. Political discussions became more open as authorities identified prisoners suitable for administrative roles in occupied Germany. The German surrender in May 1945 created complications about prisoner status. Many were reclassified as disarmed enemy forces to continue holding them while Europe stabilized. The services continued unchanged, maintaining men in limbo between war and peace. Repatriation pace varied based on factors prisoners rarely understood. Former Waffen-SS members were held longest, while those with needed skills or anti-Nazi credentials were released sooner. Men continued haircut and laundry routines while waiting for release, finding comfort in predictability. The journey home revealed how profoundly camp services had changed them. Prisoners arrived in destroyed cities wearing clean American-issued clothing. They were healthier than the civilian population that had survived bombing. Their appearance created resentment among Germans who had suffered while prisoners were maintained in comfort. Skills learned in camps proved valuable. Former prisoner barbers set up shops in ruins. Tailors who learned American techniques found work in reopening factories. English learned in camps became economically valuable during Reconstruction. The psychological impact persisted long after repatriation. Former prisoners often spoke more positively about American captivity than military service. They had experienced American abundance firsthand, understanding that Nazi propaganda about American weakness was false. These men became inadvertent ambassadors for American methods. Memories of camp services influenced German-American relations during the Cold War. Former prisoners who experienced American fairness were less susceptible to Soviet propaganda. When choosing between Soviet and American models during Reconstruction, memories of adequate food, clean clothes, and dignified treatment influenced decisions. Historical documentation reveals calculated strategy behind apparent generosity. Military reports analyzed cost-benefit ratios of prisoner maintenance. Intelligence assessments evaluated information gathered through casual surveillance. The services were experiments in population management, informing military doctrine for subsequent conflicts. The Geneva Convention's requirements were exceeded from pragmatic calculation. Well-treated prisoners would generate positive intelligence when repatriated. They would tell communities about American abundance and fairness. Investment in barbershops and laundries was psychological warfare conducted through comfort rather than coercion. Economic impact of prisoner labor subsidized services significantly. Prisoners working in agriculture and industry generated value, offsetting maintenance costs. Camp economies became self-sustaining, with prisoner labor funding prisoner services. Individual American personnel occupied complex positions. Guards who lost friends in combat ensured German prisoners had adequate supplies. The professional execution of duties, despite personal feelings, demonstrated military discipline. Yet relationships developed, with guards learning German and prisoners teaching Americans soccer. Technological transfer through services had lasting impact. Germans observed American industrial methods that influenced post-war manufacturing. Systematic organization and quality control demonstrated in camp services became models for rebuilding German industry. Camp services became sites of cultural exchange. Americans learned German songs from orchestras. Germans learned American sports. The services created spaces where enemies discovered shared humanity through common activities. Documentation through photographs became propaganda tools. Images of German prisoners getting haircuts and attending concerts were distributed internationally. Visual evidence of well-groomed prisoners was more persuasive than written reports. The services ultimately revealed that power could be exercised through provision as effectively as through deprivation. German prisoners were conquered not by brutality, but by abundance. They were controlled through comfort and influenced through systematic care. The barber shops, tailoring services, and laundries defeated Nazi ideology more thoroughly than bombs. Every former prisoner who described camp laundries to families was advertising American power. Every healthy returnee was evidence of American resources. The investment in maintaining enemies' well-generated returns conventional warfare couldn't achieve. The shock German prisoners experienced was about reconsidering fundamental assumptions. They had been told Americans were weak and cruel. The services demonstrated strength through organization and power through systematic care. The cognitive dissonance created by receiving haircuts and clean laundry from enemies forced psychological adjustments outlasting captivity. The extensive services represented a unique historical moment when military efficiency, economic abundance, and psychological sophistication combined to create an approach to enemy management that was simultaneously practical and transformative. The barber shops, tailoring shops, and laundries became spaces where war's absolute categories were quietly undermined through universal human needs for dignity and cleanliness. German prisoners who never expected such services discovered truths about their captors and themselves that no propaganda could have revealed. Through simple provision of haircuts, mended clothes, and clean laundry, they experienced defeat more complete than military conquest. They were conquered by comfort, controlled through care, and transformed through systematic provision of services, maintaining their bodies while reshaping their minds.